doesn't take long in the miniature hobby to find out about the magics of 3D printing. Resin printing glorious miniatures, or printing terrain pieces, basing bits, all kinds of awesome things that you can do with a printer. And after being in the hobby for a while, I knew that it was time that I upgraded my setup and got myself a resin 3D printer. And of course, everything went smoothly and it was super easy, and all you had to do was plug it in and everything worked perfectly. Well, not exactly. Today, I'm going to show you all of the mistakes that I made along the way so that you don't make them. And I'm going to explain why this video took 4 months instead of 2 weeks. Welcome back to Warforged Miniatures. Today is a video that has been in the making for a little bit of time. I ventured into the 3D printing space. Let's rewind time a little bit. Back in like June, I think, I wanted to buy a 3D printer. It was Prime Day and there was a lot of good deals going on. Obviously, with my plans in the hobby and the fact that I plan on doing this for a while, a resin 3D printer seemed like an investment that would make a lot of sense. So after doing a bunch of research on YouTube, which there's a ton of great content about, especially from Fohammer, which he specifically talks about printing miniatures, so it was a really great resource. And after doing my research and kind of looking at the deals that were also going on, I ended up going with the Anycubic Photon Mono M7. This printer had a lot of great reviews and is kind of a little bit better than a beginner printer, but not super advanced and not really expensive at all either. Little did I know that was the very beginning of the expenses. The more research I did, the more you learn that there is a ton of stuff that you really kind of do need to 3D print. You can't just buy a printer and some resin and go to town, especially if you don't want to poison the heck out of yourself. Another important thing is that when a resin print is finished, it still needs to be washed and cured. So a wash and cure station was another kind of no-brainer idea. And so I ended up finding this one from Frozen, which also had a really good sale going on. And it was a nice 2 machines, like a wash and print station. And it's really a pretty nice setup, and I got a good deal on it. Another thing is that because of the fumes of a resin 3D printer and the isopropyl alcohol that you usually use to wash off the 3D prints, you can't really do it in a space that you want to be in a lot, or that people occupy, or pets. And I really don't want to poison anyone or myself, so that was the next kind of big obstacle I had to deal with. The best solution I had, because I really had no space that I could put it that people weren't in often, or that wasn't right next to a room people were in often, my idea was to put it outside in a little shed. So I ended up buying this really cheap resin shed on Amazon. It was only a 6x4 shed, and I poured a little concrete pad in my backyard and built this little shed up. I was able to drill and run a nice wire in there, so I have electrical, and I kind of sealed it all and put some spray foam insulation in there, and I kind of got it weatherproofed and somewhat insulated so that I can start resin printing in this shed. That took a while to obviously set up and receive the stuff and have time to do all of that. But after a few weeks, I was able to get a nice resin printing shed set up. And now it was time to unbox the resin printer. The printer itself was really well packaged, and it came with this smiling piece of foam, which I thought was pretty hilarious. And it's a really nice, sturdy piece of equipment. I've never used another 3D printer, so I don't really have much to compare it to, but it seems pretty nice. So besides just the 3D printer in the box, you obviously have the build plate, which has this cool like pattern on there, which I'm assuming is to maybe help stuff stick to it. I actually don't know 100%. There was the resin vat, which was another crazy side experiment that I went on, and I'm just going to explain that briefly because I didn't film it. The Photon Mono M7 has a special way to kind of print faster, apparently, but it takes away some quality. And it does so by using this ACF film, which is like a frostier film, which apparently makes the printer print faster. I don't actually know how that works, but it makes it print faster. But if you want better quality, you want a more clear see-through film, so I ended up buying these FEP films to replace it. That was probably a mistake for someone who's never used a 3D printer before, and I maybe wouldn't recommend doing that. It's not very complicated to do, but there's like 55 little screws that you need to take off of the thing, and then you have to replace it with a new film and put the 55 screws back in, and it just kind of was a mess, and I ended up breaking the first one that I replaced it, so I ended up having to do that twice. So that was like 2 days, because it took me like an hour and a half, and after that point I just didn't feel like doing it after that. So yeah, maybe don't do that the first time if you end up going with this, or if you do buy a 3D printer, just buy one that has the film that you need on it right away. But I did all that, so you know, that was just a little sidebar because I didn't film any of it, but kind of like a whole mess. The printer also came with a couple cool accessories. Came with like a little bag with just a couple of gloves in it and a filter for the resin. And then it also came with some Allen keys for the machine, USB, which is I guess pretty standard. It came with some scrapers, both a plastic one and a metal one for the getting the actual builds off of the build plate. And that was pretty much all that was in the box besides like the cord. Oh, it also came with a screen protector, which putting on was annoying, but it's cool that it came with that. The assembly was pretty easy. Putting the VAT on is like very easy, and then the only other thing you really had to do was put the plug in and then screw in the little antenna for the Wi-Fi. And then I unboxed the wash and cure station, which was really well packed. It was all in one thing, and at first I thought maybe they didn't send the right stuff, but it was all in there. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It's kind of light and flimsy, kind of cheap feeling, but at the same time it does kind of everything that you want. The cool thing about the cure station, it also has a fan, so you can like set it to dry your miniatures off for like 30 minutes and then cure. So it's pretty cool. The wash station is also pretty standard. I think wash station is just like a plastic tub with like a little magnetic thing underneath that you set it on so that you can spin the water or isopropyl alcohol or whatever you got in there. Now, leveling, again, also pretty easy. It's not too complicated. I mean, there's tons of videos on how to do it, and maybe in the future I'll make one. But I think I definitely messed it up the first time. And I think mostly the problem is I didn't level it in the place that it would eventually be. And I think that the table in the shed isn't exactly as level as the table that I initially did the leveling on. So once I got everything assembled and into the shed, it was time to test print and finally get this thing going. And this is where a majority of my problems started. And I think a lot of them are probably my fault. My first thing was I didn't originally want to use isopropyl alcohol. And while the resin that I got with the printer from Anycubit required that, I also bought some Wargamer resin, which is able to be washed in water. Which, in hindsight, and if you're doing this for the first time, you should probably just use the Anycubit resin for the first time. Use it on the settings that they suggest and just kind of test it. Because one, if you already have it in a shed like me, the isopropyl alcohol smell doesn't really matter. I'm already wearing a respirator mask, which is another important thing to remember. So yeah, realistically, you should probably just start with the resin that it comes with and just buy the isopropyl alcohol, which I ended up having to buy in the long run anyway, because most of the cheaper resins and more recommended resins need the ICP, so it's just easier to do that. But anyway, I use the Wargamer resin, which is fine. It's a good resin. I think the issue is what I'll explain next. So the next phase of this was to try to get one of these prints going. And so instead of just doing the test print that's on the machine, which again I probably should have done because the USB comes loaded with some, I wanted to do some test prints that I had seen online, just that seemed simpler and didn't end up being simpler. But after some trial and error with some slicers, and I ended up downloading the Anycubit slicer because that was just the most compatible, obviously, with my printer. So I ended up running this test that I saw on a lot of different YouTube channels that prints these little squares that if they print correctly, you can read how many little posts and pillars that print and tell if your settings are correct with your printer. So I ran this first test and it was semi-successful. Some of them printed and a couple of them printed successfully, but when I pulled the plate off the printer, some of them didn't print and there was some debris left in the resin vat. So because this was like the first time I'd ever had this experience, obviously, I didn't really know what I was doing. Even though I was able to do a clean of the vat where it just prints a layer so that you can peel it off, I wasn't able to peel it off. I ended up having to pour the resin back into the jug and kind of like restarting so that I could pull it off and clean the screen. And that's when I had noticed that the vat film had like a dent in it. And because I was nervous and I didn't want to mess up the printer, that's why I ended up having to replace that film a second time. So I was really frustrated at this point. And on top of all of that, because the whole point of this test that I ran is that it prints 8 separate little squares, you have to pay attention to where they come off of on the printer so that you know which one is which when you're determining which one printed the most successful. Because of this whole mess that I made with the resin vat and the frustration, I ended up mixing up the squares, so I didn't even really know which ones were the good ones when I printed them. I mean, I knew based on what they look like, but I couldn't tell which of the settings that was on. So I was basically back to square one and pretty frustrated at this point. And so I would say the first thing I would suggest to anybody is get the resin that it comes with and do the test print that they suggest. But I mustered up the will to give it another shot, and this time I wanted to actually print something so that hopefully if something was successful, I wasn't just getting these little squares, I was getting some kind of cool looking thing in the end. So my idea was to print some bases for Kingdom Death Monster. I really like the little face bases, and the base game only comes with a few, so I wanted to print some. I found these free STLs online, and I decided to give them a shot. And this time, it was arguably a less successful run. I ended up only getting a couple of the bases printed successfully, and they kind of like warped and chipped weird, so I'm really I wasn't even 100% sure why, but I know that they didn't all work. And then again, I made a mess and had to deal with cleaning up the vat again. So now I've failed multiple times. I'm wasting resin, I'm making a mess. Because of the temperature at the time, which was a few weeks ago at this point, it was pretty hot out where I was, and inside that little shed I'm wearing a respirator mask and sweating my ass off, so it was frustrating. I was really, there was a point where I was like, I'm gonna fucking return this 3D printer. I got pretty frustrated, but after watching some more videos, I decided to give it another shot. I bought some STL files for Trench Crusade, and I just decided to print a couple of them. I put the exposure a little higher than I probably even needed to, because I was like, I just need this to print, I need this to work. Another issue I was running into, every time I would start a print or even drop the build plate into the vat of resin, I would kept getting a message that said that there was some kind of debris in the way. And it was frustrating because I had kept cleaning and I'm moving and there was nothing in the way. After doing a lot more research, the only thing I could think to try was to re-level the base with the resin in the vat. Because one of the more common things I was seeing was that if you level it too tight, when you put the resin in, sometimes it gets a little it's a little too sensitive. So you either re-level it with the resin in there, or you just kind of reset it like a millimeter up or 0.1 millimeter up or whatever. But I just wanted to get it done right this time, so I ended up having to re-level the entire thing with the resin in the vat, which was a mess, but successful. Finally, I got a successful print, 2 of the same miniature from Trench Crusade. One I printed that was pre-supported, and one that I supported with the AnyCubit supports, just to kind of see which one would work. And after some finagling, I got it cleaned and cured and got 2 pretty nice prints. One was way better. The one that was pre-supported ended up working way better. I think the supports that the AnyCubit app did were like too thick, which I know I can adjust myself, but the pre-supported worked really well, and the miniature came out really cool. Finally, I felt like I had a win, so I was pretty pumped at this point. So naturally, after getting After getting a successful print, I wanted to load a build plate up and try again, which I did do, and I ended up getting a whole bunch of Trench Crusade printed, although some of the prints failed, and I'm not even really sure why, and that will be what I have to figure out next. But I think they're probably a little too overexposed because some of them like just snapped. So here we are basically 4 months later, and I finally got a successful print on there. Granted, I don't have a ton of free time, and it's not like I worked on this a lot and just kept failing a ton, but this did take a long time, and there are definitely things I could have avoided and made this a lot quicker. Like I said, just using the resin that is suggested for the printer and doing test prints already on the USB that the printer comes with probably could have made a successful print right off the bat and made me feel a lot better. You're going to end up dealing with trouble. You're going to end up having problems. So I guess thrust yourself into the fire one way or the other and you'll figure it out. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm pretty happy with how the printer ended up working. It's a really cool process. It's really awesome to have a 3D image on a screen and then get it printed into a physical model. It's awesome. There's so much that can be done with it and so much I plan to do. Another thing though to keep in mind, and is another issue that I ended up having to deal with, is there's just a lot you need. If you think you're gonna buy a 3D printer and buy some resin and get going, you're wrong. Like, you're gonna need to buy so much stuff to do it safely. You need a respirator, you need gloves, you need a funnel, you need filters for the funnel when you're pouring resin in and out so that no chunks get in there. You need the resin cleaning and the curing station. You need isopropyl alcohol, which is a pretty toxic smelling substance, so you need it in a space. Like I said, you need a space that you can do this that isn't gonna poison you. You need to keep it away from flames because isopropyl alcohol is very flammable, so you have to keep it well sealed. So there's a lot to that. There's a lot to just kind of being mindful of the safety aspect of it all. Buying mats to kind of keep everything clean and off of your surfaces because resin is a mess and it's toxic. You don't want to touch anything that you've touched with your resin gloves, and if you do, like, to actually clean that off, you have to cure the resin. So it is a lot. There's just a lot to it. And if I wasn't planning on using a 3D printer a lot in the future, I probably wouldn't suggest it. Like, if you just want to print Trench Crusade or you just want to print one or two things, just find a company that can print it for you. There's people that will do that. But I definitely plan on using this a lot more in the future. Another thing to keep in mind, and is another thing that I have to worry about specifically, is that resin only works at a certain temperature. And now I'm keeping this outside in a not very well insulated shed, and I live in the Northeast, so it's super cold here. Like 7 months out of the year we get a lot of snow, and so that will be an issue. I did find this fermentation belt, which is just like a warming belt essentially that I can wrap around the vat and keep the resin warm, which I've seen people use very successfully online, and I think that will work for me. And I also ended up buying this little tent. Basically, it's like a thermal tent, so you put the resin printer inside of it and it will just keep the printer warmer. It's actually used for venting as well, but I'm not really worried about that. It keeps the printer warmer, so I'm hoping that will kind of avoid all of those issues for printing in the winter. But overall, I think that this printer is pretty awesome. I think it's pretty user-friendly, pretty beginner-friendly, because it does come with an app that allows you to monitor your print and it has fail detection. So if there's an issue with the print, it tells you, so you're not just wasting time thinking it's printing when it hasn't. You can check the app and monitor it. The wash and cure station worked perfectly, I'd imagine, is exactly as you'd want them to work. I think overall I'm pretty happy with all the purchases that I made. It definitely was more of a time investment, cost investment, and just an overall mental investment to get it to work. And there's a lot more to it. There's a lot of settings that you can tweak to make your prints better, and I'm definitely nowhere near where I want to be with the quality. But I did get some successful prints, and I'm going to show you guys that right now. So not bad, and I'm pretty excited to paint these Trench Crusade characters. They're really cool. The new Antioch. I love the Christian Crusaders. Let's freaking go. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. So let me know what you guys think down below. Are you gonna get a 3D printer? Are you already good at resin 3D printing? And am I doing this? Do you have any tips for me? Is there any questions that you guys have that I didn't answer in this video or didn't talk about? And let me know also, is there any other 3D printing content you want to see in the future, including any suggestions you have for cool models to print or anything like that. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys. This channel has been really growing and it's been really cool to see, and I'm excited to keep doing this and kind of see where this community goes. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and hit the notification bell so that you know when I drop the next video. And until next time, peace.